Wonderful. Well, I suppose I ought to ask whether you can hear me, Natasha.
I can.
So I'm not on mute. That is good. That's excellent news. And Christina, that was a fabulous panel. Thank you very much indeed. Really, really good. I'm coming to you from the Library of the Future. I feel that so often on these Zoom calls, people have got these magnificent bookcases behind them, and I fear that in a generation or two's time they will be relics designed for decoration more than anything else. So I thought I'd put as a backdrop the library, the digital library of the future, because today we're talking about the future of law, justice, and everything, a narrow subject that shouldn't take very long. I'm going to try as best I can to get some slides up, which we'll go through. So, all being well, in the best of all possible worlds in this Panglossian environment or Zoom, have the slides come up? Yes, that is a yes from Christina. Okay, that's wonderful. So all I need to do now, all being well, is to get these things to, well, we're going to have to do it like this. I think that's where we are. So the future of law, justice, and everything 3.0. This comes from the third of 5 books written by Douglas Adams in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's the third book. The third book was entitled Life, the Universe, and Everything. And that concept of life, the universe, and everything was the ultimate question. You'll remember, those of you that have read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. If you haven't, I strongly encourage you to read it. That 2 individuals, Lunkwell and Fuchs, asked the ultimate question of the greatest supercomputer of their era, the greatest supercomputer of their generation. And the ultimate question was the question of life, the universe, and everything. And the computer's name was DeepMind. And DeepMind thought about the question of life, the universe, and everything, and said it would take 7.5 million years for DeepMind to come up with the answer to the question. It was interesting also because it was in the book Life, the Universe, and Everything that and it's ironic given what's happened over the weekend that it was decided that the word Belgium was the rudest word in the universe, and there may be many in Whitehall that share a similar view today. But coming back to it, so the 7.5 million years later, the ancestors were waiting for the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. And DeepMind awoke and gave the answer, and the answer was 42. Well, for a population that had been waiting for 7.5 million years, they felt that 42 perhaps wasn't the answer they were expecting, and they made that point to DeepMind, that it was an awfully long time to wait for that answer. And DeepMind said, well, the problem you've got is you don't know what the question is. So they said, well, what's the question? And the computer said, well, the question, that is too difficult for me. I have to build another computer. I have to build another computer, which will take 10 million years to be able to tell you what the question is. And I feel that we're at that stage when it comes to legal technology that we all kind of know that the answer is that technology is going to make things better. We all know that technology is going to play an increasingly important role. We all know that technology is going to be critical to fill a justice chasm of people who have no access to justice, and I'll come on to that. We know it's there, we know, we can see it, it's like the number 42. But what we don't know is how. We don't know the question. So 2 things, I suppose, come out of that. Let's look at what the question might be, and let's also think where we are technologically, because up until now we've relied on the equivalent of DeepMind, you know, the most powerful supercomputer of its era, but it itself had to build a more powerful computer to deliver the answer. And I want us to think now about where we are in processing power. This is the most beautiful chandelier I think that anybody could purchase, because not only is it stunning and it looks like a chandelier, it's actually a quantum processor called Sycamore, which has been developed, which will roll out over time, I'm sure, for commercial use. And this processor takes us to the next generation. This takes us from black and white TV to the internet. This takes us from the internet to, you know, the space station. It's an extraordinary processor, because what it can handle is 10,000 years worth of processing for today's fastest supercomputers can be handled by the Sycamore processor. 10,000 years can be handled in 200 seconds. We are truly at a remarkable stage of development for processing and computer power. So when I think people tell us today that technology isn't able to deliver against the needs of community and the legal system and the justice system, that may or may not be right. We'll talk about it, but certainly with this shift in processing power, it seems likely to me that we are going to get to a stage where what you might describe as mercy or compassion or humanity will be able to be handled by computers. We come on now to the I suppose the arguments why people think that technology isn't ready yet to take on justice or the law. And they tend to fall into three buckets. The first is technology simply isn't advanced enough at this stage. It isn't there yet. We have to be careful not to implement it too soon. You know, we'll hear often people talking about AI and ethics, and Christina is a fabulous advocate of that. Certainly my Samsung phone has no ethical constraints within it, but the programming of it may well lead to complexities, and people want to think that through before they adopt technology. The second reason people suggest that technology may not be the panacea is that law in and of itself is too complicated. I suppose to, you know, someone, if we go for the lawyer non-lawyer distinction, a non-lawyer reading a complex sale and purchase agreement would treat it as an alien language. So law itself is too complicated. You know, the civilian and common law principles that lie behind words like reasonable or good faith are far too complicated for a computer to understand. And the third objection is that people simply don't trust computers. They'd much rather hear their news from a human. There's a faith that we have in humanity. There's a connection that we have with humanity, which means that people trust humans more than they do computers. And I want to take us through, if I may, I want to take us through that. To do that, I'm just going to stop sharing for a second and see if I can get this slideshow to actually come up. Okay. Sadly, technology has defeated me. So let me go back to sharing the screen. Okay, I'm going to talk to you about three things. We're talking first about technology not being advanced enough, and I'll call up, if I may, here, this one, AlphaZero and Stockfish. Now, AlphaZero and Stockfish is fascinating because Stockfish, as it was Stockfish 8, now Stockfish 9, possibly Stockfish 10, was the greatest chess computer ever invented. It's all of human recorded moves in chess, millions and millions of moves, and Stockfish as a computer knew all of those moves. It was programmed with those moves. There was no move a human could make that Stockfish 9 had not seen in previous games and was able to predict an outcome. It was effectively unbeatable because it was the entirety of all human knowledge of chess. It was the ultimate chess computer. That is until AlphaZero was developed by Google. And AlphaZero was a very clever piece of technology, a machine learning piece of technology, an AI piece of technology. And all that AlphaZero was given was the rules of chess. It had no history, no humanity, no human decision making. It had no precedent. It just had the framework. It just had the rules. It took 4 hours for AlphaZero to beat Stockfish 9. And despite many iterations of Stockfish since then, Stockfish still cannot beat AlphaZero. The computer, through its own thought processes, if you will, if you want to call them that, its own processing power, was able to outthink at chess the entirety of human knowledge. So anyone that thinks that computers aren't smart enough may reference that, although is chess the answer to that? Because language, of course, is so different. Human language is very different. Comprehension is so difficult to understand. The nuance of words is so difficult. So I'll pull up here Alibaba. Alibaba developed a piece of AI to understand English language, to be able to review and understand and comprehend pages and pages of text. And they ran the Alibaba AI model again at the Stanford reading test, Stanford University's reading test, to test people's ability to read and understand and comprehend English. Lo and behold, the AI was more successful than humans on average at the Stanford reading test. So this concept that computers aren't able to understand language is falling away. So, you know, we've got the chess, now we've got the language, but what about that objection about the law? Well, law geeks had a piece of technology. It was 3 years old at the time, so it was already fairly out of date. And all that technology was asked to do was to review legal documents and to come up with problems within the legal documents. So in a competition between the law geeks piece of AI and a number of lawyers asked to review the same documents, there were a number of non-disclosure agreements, and all that the technology and the lawyers had to do was to review them and identify issues within them over a period of time. And this was a test as to whether technology could review fairly complicated legal documents and how they would perform against human lawyers. Well, interestingly enough, the AI beat the lawyers in both accuracy and in time. The AI, the legal AI, was 94% accurate in its review of the documents. Now, bear in mind, only the best lawyer of all the lawyers managed to get 94% accuracy. That was the highest that humans could achieve. But on average, the lawyers only managed 85% accuracy. But the real differentiator is that on average, lawyers took 92 minutes, an hour and a half, to review the documentation. The technology took 26 seconds. 92 minutes of billable time versus 26 seconds of a microchip's time. So when we're talking there, and the last panel was talking about the billable hour becomes irrelevant when one law firm can offer a piece of technology that does legal review in 26 seconds for the client, whilst the other one is having to, for less accuracy, pay a lawyer or charge a lawyer for an hour and a half. That's where we are when it comes to technology right now. Seems to be better than us at analysing the rules of the game, which is to some extent what the legal system is. Often seemingly better than us at understanding English, and certainly in this narrow example, better than us at reviewing contracts. Faster and better. And that being the case, it does call into question how we're going to deliver legal services and justice going forward. There is, of course, this not Metal Mickey for those of my generation. This is actually a brilliantly intelligent robot. It should have been called Marvin the Paranoid Android, but actually it was called Promobot. Actually, I wrote it down here. Promobot IR7. Sorry, Promobot I-77. It was a Russian-made artificially intelligent robot, and it was given a very mundane task. It was put into a conference center, and it was just asked to distribute brochures. This, of course, was way beneath its processing power, way beneath its processing power. So it left. This is actually a picture of it trying to cross the road. It left the conference center. It just got bored, you might say, and had to be rescued by the police, which brought Promobot back to the conference center to carry on its menial task. And so it left again, at which point they switched it off. So that had not been programmed into Promobot. I certainly wouldn't suggest that Promobot had some intelligence. I don't think it really was bored. But very interesting how we don't understand why Promobot took the choice to cross the road and leave the conference. And part of it takes me on to the Facebook experiment, where Facebook put two negotiation protocols next to each other, two AI-based negotiation protocols, and asked them to negotiate because it wanted to understand from the technology which negotiation protocol might win, what the outcome would be. It was just an interesting experiment. Actually, what happened is both negotiation protocols realized that using the English language was an inefficient way to negotiate, and they started to invent between them their own negotiating language. It did lead to some peculiar communication, as you see: Bob, I can, I, everything else. Alice, balls have 0 to me, to me, to me, to me, to me, to me. Now that doesn't make sense to us, but they were actually starting to find a way of communicating with each other which was more efficient than the language that we had programmed. So we are getting to that stage. Forget the Sycamore processor. We are getting to a stage now where I think it's fair to say that technology is getting really rather clever, perhaps even cleverer than we might wish. But then we come on to that important distinction of trust. People don't trust computers. So Georgia Tech did this wonderful experiment in the US. This is a picture of the emergency guide robot. It's a magnificent robot. Now, this robot was tasked with guiding students who had signed up for a psychology, what they thought was a psychology experiment, where they were going to be paid to take a test. And what happened was, as the students entered a corridor, they were told to just follow the robot to the room where they would be taking the test. Anyway, the robot proved to be hopeless. It crashed into the walls. It took them past the right door. It was frankly a completely useless robot. And the reason it was useless is because it wasn't a robot. It was being controlled by remote control by other students. Okay. So the robot was proving itself to be a completely useless robot. But the robot eventually managed to get a cohort of students into a room where they started filling out a questionnaire. And as they filled out the questionnaire in the room, smoke started billowing under the door of the room they were in. And as they opened the door, the whole corridor seemed to be full of smoke. It was as if the whole place was on fire. But it didn't matter, because the emergency guide robot was there to rescue them, waving its arms, those white neon, it was waving its arms, and it was showing them to go in the opposite direction to the way they came in, and the opposite direction to the green emergency exit sign that was behind the robot. And the robot headed in the wrong direction and eventually led them to a room which was a complete dead end. I ask you, what percentage of these brilliant students at Georgia Tech followed the robot rather than their common sense? 100%. 100% of the students felt that they would trust this crazy piece of technology, which had already demonstrated itself to be, frankly, useless, instead of the signage and common sense that they had. So whilst that isn't, I suppose, what people mean by do we trust technology, there is a trust towards technology which would have gone beyond if a human was there trying to steer the students in the wrong direction. So I think we are at a point where technology overcomes some of the objections that people have. And in a way, when we think about the future, it talks to a very different future than the place that we are at today. So what are the challenges going to be to the adoption of technology? I think they fit into really 5 camps. The first is that data for the legal system is concentrated. Christina will know better than most, but in the UK, which is meant to be at the very forefront of the rule of law and open justice and access to justice, up until now, we still don't have judgments published by the court system. I do believe that's changing, but I mean, we don't have a system in the world where we can analyze judgments easily. There isn't a centralized place. And when it comes to law firms themselves, they, of course, for privacy and other reasons, concentrate their data. They don't share their data amongst law firms, the Law Society, the SRA, or anyone. So there's a concentration of data which makes it difficult really to design something which is system-wide. The second challenge to implementation of legal technology is leadership. That there really is very little, and great work by TechNation and LawTech UK, and Jennifer speaking at this event, and that's under Richard Susskind, Christina, and others' leadership. But really, as a legal profession, we don't have leadership in the same way medtech or regtech or fintech has. There's no real champion out there right now, although, as I say, in some countries like Singapore and the UK and Kazakhstan, that is beginning to change. The third challenge is that, you know, for medicine, a human is a human. Now, I know doctors will say that's not true. And, you know, there's different genetics and people are slightly different. But the reality is most people have 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, a nose and the like, whilst laws are very different in each jurisdiction. And that does add a layer of complexity to delivering a viable economic model for legal technology and legal advice. The fourth area is that's holding us back is, of course, it's often the lawyers themselves that are regulating the sector. So if we look to the US, they're very uncomfortable with AI giving legal advice, and many would say that's because they're client-centric. Others would say it's because they're terrified of what that means for the profession. Who knows what the right answer is? But certainly, lawyers are unlikely to vote for a piece of technology that can review documents better than lawyers in 1/200th of the time. So by regulators, in a sense, being run by lawyers or retired lawyers or people who've trained as lawyers, it does mean that we may not see the kind of innovation that we would see if that wasn't the case. And that's not every jurisdiction, but to some extent, many jurisdictions. But the fifth, and I perhaps perhaps one of the key areas why we're not seeing legal technology being implemented as much as we like is that it's simply really scary. Lawyers have trained for a long time. You know, they may have done years at university, they've gone on to law school, they've gone on to train, they've gone on to develop their business. As we heard earlier, they're you know, finders, minders, or grinders, but they fit into a category. They work often for a law firm before they go into the private sector, and they're molded in a certain way. And when one talks to them about that way being an old-fashioned way, it's the blacksmith versus the mechanic, really. It's just too scary. It's impossible for them to think about that future because it's not a future that welcomes them. And the tradition in the legal system is stability. That often plays out as perhaps a resistance to change unfairly. What will happen, of course, is that the lawyers that don't change are going to be disintermediated by technology, disintermediated by firms like GLTS in Singapore, disintermediated by funders, disintermediated by the Big Four. There's going to be whole-scale disintermediation by especially the technology sector of the legal profession that doesn't adapt. So scary it may be, but nevertheless important for lawyers to think about how to embrace. And then we come on to perhaps one of the biggest drivers why we need to look at the legal system as a whole and how legal technology might help. Certainly, it may be that for the largest of transactions and the largest of disputes, you know, data rooms, physical pieces of paper, you know, an army of trainees and paralegals reviewing paperwork on the clock, maybe that won't change. It ought to change, but maybe it won't change. But actually, when we get to the grassroots, society's grassroots, let's see how we're doing. People talk of a justice gap, but the recent research from the Hague Institute for the Innovation of Law, entitled Elephant in the Courtroom, demonstrates that around the world, and they surveyed 80,000 people around the world for the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 16.3, equal access to justice, when people are kept awake at night, the legal problem that they have is so bad that they can't sleep as a result. Only 16% of people actually go and see a lawyer. 84% of people don't bother. And only 5% of people go to court. 95% of people kept awake at night with a serious legal issue don't even go to the state institution set out to help them. And of the ones that do go to court, of the ones that do go to the state institution that's there to help them, 70% are unhappy with the outcome. Now, imagine if that was the medical profession. Imagine if people were kept awake in bed at night and they're in so much pain, physical pain, they can't sleep. And 84% said, actually, I'd rather not see a doctor. I don't like doctors. I don't trust doctors. They're very expensive. I think I'll just self-medicate. I'll work it out. The pain will go away. And imagine if 95% of the population kept awake with physical pain, said, I'm not going to go to hospital. It's not the place for me. It's only for rich people, powerful people. It's not a place I want to go. And imagine of the 5% of the population that do go to hospital, 70% say that they thought it was a very unhappy experience. They didn't like it. We would say it's a failing health system. And yet, sadly, we accept it as a legal system. And that has to change. And how will it change? Well, when people were asked, what do you want from a legal system? What do you want from a justice system? What they said was, tell me if I've got, a case. Tell me if I've got a right. Tell me if I'm in the right. Give me some advice. And the second thing was not, will you help me fight it? Will you help me go to arbitration? Will you help me go to litigation? Will you help me go to court and fight it out? Not at all. It was, can you tell me if I've got, something I should be, I should be thinking about? Is that, have I got a legal leg to stand on? And secondly, can you help me solve my problem? Can you take the pain away from me? Interesting when we think how much we invest in our justice systems, which serve only 5% of the population and which are dedicated to an adversarial approach, when actually what the population want is not an adversarial approach, but to make the pain go away in a reasonable fashion. So where we see in the world this justice chasm, as I call it, with 95% disenfranchised outside, how will we fill the gap? Can we rely on the existing court system? Probably not. I think that the scale of the problem is too great for it to conquer on its own without really vast systemic change, and court systems, of course, by their nature, aren't good at systemic change. So where will it come from? Well, it seems to me it's not going to come from the legal profession either, because the 95% of people kept awake at night with a legal problem, not many of them have enough money to pay for lawyers in today's environment. Legal fees keep going up and up and up, and people need help. So where will it come from? And I think the answer has to be technology. It has to be grassroots technology. More people have access to the internet. This is Professor Susskind's point. More people have access to the internet than to justice in the world today. So let's use the internet. Let's harness the internet in order to deliver access to justice for not just the majority, but the vast majority of people who are currently excluded from our system. So I'm going to draw to a close with some predictions, which are more, I suppose, questions. They're my thoughts on where we're going, and I'm very pleased in the last 10 minutes of this talk actually to debate those through the Q&A platform or the chat platform on the app. So these are some thoughts that I've got about where we're going. It certainly seems to me that if most people in the world are looking for help, they're not looking for a fight, they're looking for help. It seems to me that they won't want to get on a bus to go into a city centre, to walk up to some Gothic columns, to wait in a wooden waiting room to get that help. They won't want to go to a lawyer's office and be charged for that help. What they want is online help. And I think as we see models rolling out from RDO in the UK and Australia through to Jaw and others, we're starting to see that ability to give people help online at low or no cost. And I think that's going to be very much the future of legal advice for the vast majority of people. Online facilitation tools, online tools to help people understand if they have a legal case, online tools to help them solve the legal case. Look at the amazing work that Mark Deutsch has done in the US with People Claim Now Rhubarb, or that Colin Rule did initially with PayPal and eBay, then moving on to Modria, helping people solve the most difficult often disputes of their lives, family disputes. And now moving on to mediate.com. These people are dedicated to providing online platforms to help people identify if they have a legal case and then helping them solve that. And I think help will continue increasingly to be online. To be relevant, lawyers will need to be online. The second thing is China, the power of China. China is, to to many extent underestimated. You know, I talk to judges about China, they roll their eyes as if, you know, it's a very poor system, an old-fashioned system. And perhaps 20 years ago, that was right. But actually now, under the auspices of the IT department of the Supreme People's Court, run by the most brilliant technologist called Jan Feng, who's not a lawyer, not a judge, but a passionate technologist, probably the Chinese court's the most advanced courts in the world. They're one of the few courts where you can send the equivalent of a WhatsApp message and ask for legal advice, and an AI-powered piece of technology will share with you a view on it. Why? Because they realized early on that most people couldn't afford to go and ask a lawyer the question. So if society was to give them an answer, someone has to give it. And you know, they're already looking at the courts of the internet in Hangzhou. They're looking at robotic judges. They've even got technology now that helps judges review all case materials in any format and develop a draft judgment. So they are by far, I think, the most advanced when it comes to using technology within the legal framework and the justice framework. And I know many of you will have, especially from the United States, have a sort of knee-jerk reaction to talk of China and technological advancement, because the US has always held that dominance, or certainly for many years. But it's there. I visited the US and I visited China. I was president of the International Association for Court Administration, and I've seen courts around the world, and by far China is registering more blockchain patents, more smart contract patents, and is using technology in a far more innovative way. And I think we'll see that law tech will rise from China, probably not from elsewhere in the world. The third prediction is that it will not be the government sector that transforms the legal environment. We will not see access to justice being developed in large part by the government sector. I think that access to justice particularly, and justice as a whole, and legal advice and the ability to solve problems is going to be led by the private sector. And many of you may fear that. Many of you may say, well, that's wrong. Society should be delivering those services. It should not be outsourced. And personally, I have concerns when if you take a platform like Amazon, and when they become the platform and the
Oh, hi, Mark. Yep, there's a problem with
technology. Mark? This is the time to get into legal technology. This is the time to start thinking about the use of technology to. It says unmute my speaker. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Mark. Mark, hello.
No, I can't hear anything.
Oh, we can hear you, Mark.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, good. All right, wonderful. Well, I'll carry on. I'm almost done, actually. So I think that it is going to be driven by, legal technology is going to be driven by the private sector, and it's going to be a profit motive, because the profits are going to be absolutely substantial. So I leave you with this thought, if I may. And I don't know if you can see this because there's a great big banner in front of it, but what it says is, this is from willrobotstakemyjob.com, that prestigious predictive tool, which says that actually lawyers are safe. There's only a 4% chance that robots will take lawyers' jobs. And there's very much a view that AI and legal technology will not automate the legal profession out of existence. But I think my view would be that although AI and legal technology will not automate the legal profession out of existence, there's very much the chance that lawyers and court systems and arbitration systems that do use AI and legal technology will replace lawyers, court systems and arbitration systems that do not choose to use AI. Gosh, that's quite a powerful cough. And on that note, I will now hand over for questions. Of which?
Oh, hi, Mark. Sorry for the delay there. Yes, we have a few questions. So What are your views on the quantum cloud and its distributing the landscape? Who will have access to this tech? And will it be available to all?
Well, I think that is an absolutely marvelous question and almost impossible to answer. I think in terms of quantum processing, the fact that the private sector, Google particularly, is pushing it, suggests to me that governments have had it for a long time. You know, there is a question mark when people land in certain countries. It used to be said the Blackberries used to run hot. And there was always a feeling that as one landed in a country, a lot of data was being downloaded off devices. To this day, there are still companies that don't allow company laptops into certain jurisdictions. And the reason for that was that, yes, they were downloading, I think governments were downloading vast amounts of data from visitors to the country, everybody, as they monitor data that's moving across their jurisdiction already today. But they couldn't do anything with it because the level of encryption was so high. As we get into a quantum world, of course, if it can process 10,000 years of decryption in 200 seconds, almost everything that's been encrypted to date, bank details and Gmail accounts and WhatsApp messages, can be de-encrypted easily. Now, my guess is that governments have been doing that for a while, but haven't really been telling anybody about it. But as we get to a commercial level of quantum processing, it seems likely that we're going to have to rethink privacy in a very different way. As that applies into data that's on the cloud, I think two elements spring to mind. One is that I think we're still going to be hampered by connectivity to the cloud, the speed of connectivity, but actually within the cloud, it does mean that we'll be able to process, if you take Google and Gmail, they will be able to process all of the data that's sitting on that platform far faster and with far more accuracy than they ever have before, giving them different tools to monetize the data that you and I share with them. So I think it's fair to say that it is totally a game changer. And I suspect that we as customers will be the last to benefit from it, unless you think that targeted advertising is a benefit. Natasha, was there another one?
Yes, thanks, Mark. Do you agree that proliferation of quantum computing should be greater, should enable greater use of the blockchain smarter contracts, i.e. automate supply chains, financial transactions, etc.?
Well, I'm really clear. I don't know who's sending these questions, but God bless you. This is absolutely the way I'm thinking. That one of the challenges smart contracts have at the moment is they're quite Boolean, you know, if this, then that. If bauxite is delivered to the mine on time, then pay bauxite miner. If late, penalize bauxite miner, incent supply chain. These are quite Boolean processes, and we're still having to come out into the physical world of oracles. Now, they could be AI-driven weather channels, or they could be human oracles, but we're still having to come out of the platform, the blockchain, let's call it, platform, the distributed ledger, the smart contract, because Boolean only goes so far. And drafting is really difficult. So we heard earlier from Tim about relational contracting. It's really hard to put a relationship into words. You know, lawyers use words because they don't know how to define things in a contract. You know, the parties will act reasonably towards each other. Well, how do you actually code reasonable so that a computer can make a decision on whether it was or it wasn't? And by its very nature, we've given it a legal meaning, but it's still what the man or woman on the Clapham Omnibus might think, and I don't know how to code that. But with quantum processing, this point I was making is, how can we introduce processes where computers can start to predict what reasonable looks like? Because the minute we can get processing power that will make determinations on a smart contract that without the need for human intervention, we are then looking at proper contracting, real contracting, true contracting, in a world which is largely self-executing and more efficient, much more efficient from a contracting point of view. So I think it's going to be fascinating to see how that quantum processing helps us do things differently. The next question then, outside of contracting, is to what extent then can a computer deliver humanity or mercy or justice, or all those traits that we think are exclusive to humans? We've seen in the US, you know, that AI-based processes are up to 41% more accurate than a human judge, 41% more accurate than a human judge in predicting outcomes on bail applications, even though the judge has been doing it for 30 years. But there isn't really much justice, so to speak, in a bail application. It's just a question of, will they commit a crime on bail? Will they turn up at the next hearing? But can we see quantum computing giving us the technology, the power to analyze sufficient information that we can make judicial decisions and apply an overlay of fairness? I think Christina will have strong views on that, and I certainly don't think it's going to happen by Christmas this year.
Just one more question for you, please. So how will we protect the enormous amount of personal data that these supercomputers will be able to collect, transmit, store, and analyze? Will policy and regulation be able to keep up with these technology advances?
No, I think absolutely not. I mean, as I said, I think what we might call privacy, those days have gone now. What we believe to be encryption, you know, we're so pleased, aren't we, when WhatsApp tells us that it's end-to-end encryption. I think we can forget all of that. What does it mean for the banking sector, who's under increasing pressure to deliver greater access to our money with ever greater security? I don't know. I think it's very difficult when actually using private sector technology now, everybody has a key to our safe, so to speak. It gets really tricky. And for institutions like Google and Facebook and others, which have vast amounts of our personal data, I think we can probably feel safe that the economic incentive is such that they're not going to let people get access to it unless they can sell it, unless they can make money out of it. But, you know, we've seen governments hacked by individuals. We've seen NASA hacked by teenagers. There is every risk that with the tools, the right tools, somebody could perform a pretty significant amount of damage to our privacy and to the privacy of people around the world. And then that comes on to, is privacy that important in a world where there isn't any? You know, we value privacy because it's a generational thing. We value privacy, but when you look to examples of nations where they have largely, the youth gives up their privacy, right? Because they sell their privacy in return for getting free email and free social media. They seem less worried. There is some recent data out of China that say that Chinese youth are more and more worried about it. But historically, people have been willing to give up a degree of privacy in return for what they perceive to be, you know, value. So privacy may be less and less of an issue, especially in a world where we all probably know that there is no privacy from the government in what we do. So we're really only talking about private sector privacy. And for many of us that's sitting on a Google platform or Facebook or Instagram, or if we're really down with it, Snapchat, we've given away, the postman owns the post, right? We've given away our privacy. So possibly it is an important issue for confidential information, but it's one we're going to have to adapt to quite quickly.
Thanks, Mark. You are actually very popular, so we've got a few more questions for you. So could you kindly comment on the most crucial things developing countries should consider in implementing tech and their legal spaces? Don't
let the tail wag the dog. This is critical, because so often, and I heard it, you know, where I worked before, I heard it, well, let's buy some technology to do that. And then you say, well, what do we need the technology for? Oh, because it's technology, because it's like Monty Python's The Machine That Goes Ping, you know, where they wheel in, someone's giving birth and they wheel in this machine, and the surgeon says, what's this? And the administrator says, oh, it's the machine that goes ping. And they say, well, what's it for? And they say, we don't know, but it's really expensive and it goes ping. And I think much of that is the way in which governments and large private sector just buy technology. They're sort of sold in, often by quite aggressive technology companies, explaining that they have the new, you know, the new panacea. But technology is never a panacea, certainly not at the moment. I mean, yes, it's starting to invent its own language. Yes, it is doing some amazing things, but that doesn't really help us at the moment. So when it comes to implementing technology, the first question is, why do we need it? In our court system, and where I worked, we were described as the most advanced court system in the world. We use technology to enable our customers, and our customers are not the law firms, but the people paying the law firms. Most courts forget that. Enable our customers and to take the drudgery away from our staff. Why did we want to take drudgery away from our staff? Because we wanted our staff to be interacting with our customers. It was simple. So the technology we brought in was customer-centric, customer-facing, had a great UX, but also allowed for our staff not to be doing photocopying and scanning and all those boring things that many people around the world are forced to do in government institutions. What they were able to do was get on the phone and respond to emails and actually help people who had a problem. And we realized at our core, that's what we needed technology to do. And we built it specially. We used a fantastic SME in Walton-upon-Thames, which built probably the most advanced court management system in the world, bar none. And we used that and we shaped it and we designed it, and it did an absolutely marvelous job. So the best advice I can give is don't let the tail wag the dog. Don't let the technology company sell you a panacea. Work out first what it is you're trying to achieve with it, and then the best way to achieve it. Don't underestimate the power of human brilliance. Don't underestimate the wisdom of the crowd. Never underestimate the customer, whoever the customer might be, a citizen, a lawyer, whatever it might be. And then use the technology to make sure that your goals can be achieved.